Welcome to Art Talk. My name is Courtney Johnson. We're here at Tennessee State University Department of Art and Design. We're excited to have with us today Bisa Butler, and joining her in conversation will be Professor Samuel Dunson. So welcome everyone. We're Friday. It's been a very interesting month, and thanks for taking time to join us here today. I like to do a minute of silence and reflection after I read a short writing about honoring the land. Then we'll begin. So I'm going to start with honor this land. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional indigenous inhabitants of this land. To pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. This is a small step towards honoring Native communities and enacting a much larger project of decolonization and reconciliation, along with a way to connect us back to protecting Mother Earth and the life that the earth sustains. Again, thanks for joining us. I'll give a little short introduction to both Bisa Butler and Sam Dunson, who Sam is one of our professors here at Tennessee State University. Samuel Dunson graduated from TSU in 1992, and then 2000, he got his MFA from Savannah College of Art and Design. If you don't know Sam, I highly suggest you reach out and get to know him or check out his work. But he's fabulous and makes phenomenal work. He looks at themes involving love, acceptance of life and death, his personal narrative of being a Black male in society, and being a husband and father. His work is through figurative. He looks at figurative as a way to connect to the human experience, and storytelling is important in its process. I think that's why this conversation can be so fun, because Bisa Butler's work also is a beautiful representation of storytelling. She's an American fiber artist known for Quilted Portraits designs celebrating Black life. She's exhibited extensively at the Smithsonian, the Epcot Center, and graduated from Howard University, so another HBCU proud here, and her master's is from Montclair State University. Her bright fabric pieces are pulled from a range of influences, including family photo albums, the philosophies of Afro-Cobra, Romare Bearden's collages, Faith Ringo's quilts, and Gordon Parks' photography. I stole that sentence from her latest exhibit that's up at the Chicago Institute of Art. But I was like, that's a beautiful representation of, you know, of the work and
75 people are there already.
The movement that she's bringing forward. To say I'm excited, I hope y'all are excited to have Bisa Butler with us here today. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Uh-oh, Sam's muted.
Sorry about that. So they're looking at everybody else's microphone, didn't look at mine. So I wanted to say, well, I was saying, I certainly appreciate Bisa coming in and sort of blessing us with her presence and also her thoughts and ideas today. And we're so thankful that she is sort of been allowed to, or being allowing her schedule to pull us in, especially as being connected to HBCUs, and especially as being connected to sensibilities that we all are connected to. I want to just say thank you to her first and foremost. And then I was also saying, just everybody, if you could just be mindful of your microphones, because we want to be respectful of the process and so on and so forth. What we were speaking about before is I guess you would say logistically, we wanted to allow Ms. Butler to actually present her works first and kind of give us a little bit of a background of, I mean, what she's doing, her process, and so on and so forth. And after that, we'd like to just have a conversation. We have a few questions that might pertain, I mean, closely to the university, but also to the ideas that we, I mean, all have as artists in general. So we'll speak to her after she presents her work. And after the conversation that we all have, we'd love to open it up to anyone that may have questions of Ms. Butler. And even at that time, I would ask that everyone is respectful of her time and respectful of the process and the questions that you ask. All right. And I will hand it off to Bisa Butler at this time, if she's prepared and ready to present her works, and we'll speak afterwards.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Excuse me, I guess to your community, you're known as Professor Dunson. So, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you all of you here who are popping in. I know it's a Friday, and for some it could be a religious day. So I'm happy to be sharing this day with you. I have a few things that I'd like to show you all, just so that you can see what is it that I do anyway. Some of you might be familiar with my work, and some may not have seen what I do. So I'm going to share with you. I'm going to show you, I'm going to start with what I have done most recently, and I'm going to present. It'll take a couple of seconds to get this together. Okay, so this is an image of what I do. So when people say, what is it that you're doing? I'm a quilter, but I make quilted portraits. I use fabric that other quilters might use, such as cotton and silk and lace and whatever actually I can put my hands on, velvet, but I'm using it in a non-traditional way because my quilts are not for beds per se, but they're for the wall. They're decorative primarily. They don't have the strength to stand up to washing and drying. And then also that my quilts are not necessarily geometric or abstract shapes, but or so much as a pattern, but I'm trying to make portraits of people in my life, people who I'm influenced by, people who I might be impressed by. And this image here that I blew up just so that you could see the detail is one of the latest things that I've done. It's a quilt of Chadwick Boseman. And Chadwick is really special to us all as a community. We all know he was a Black Panther. I feel particularly connected, and I'm sure we all have our bits of connection. So that I put this up here to just get into the inspiration behind my work. Why do I make work? What was the purpose? It originally always started out with somebody who I admire. And for whatever reason, I feel compelled to make a portrait of them. Chadwick Boseman, we know he was a Black Panther. He and I both graduated from Howard University. I was a couple years ahead of him. We were not friends while we were on campus, but I should have. I'm pretty sure, and I know how I was at the time. I thought I was, a senior and too cool for school, especially when you're getting ready to graduate. And Chadwick was a sophomore. We were both in the School of Fine Arts. And I find we did connect after, though, I should say, after graduation and all of that. But what I find that I really connect to Chad about is the way he selected only certain roles that he felt represented himself and his people properly. So that's the why do I do things. And then what you're seeing on the screen, I'm using velvet and lace in his hair to talk about the pride and the beauty of African American hair texture. I'm using specific African printed fabrics to tell the story of Chadwick Boseman. I call this piece Forever because of his comments. Well, first of all, in the movie when they said Wakanda forever, that was the catchphrase or that was their greeting. But I also called it Forever because since he has passed away, it's my own religious belief that his spirit will go on forever. The next piece is something that I did while I was in school. I started out as a painting major at Howard University, and I put this up here because I know that there are a lot of faculty and a lot of current students and former students who are within or maybe right out of the process in school. How do you find your own voice? What is it that you want to say? The colors that you see on the screen are reminiscent of the Afro-Cobra color schemes. And I talk about Afro-Cobra because our professors in the painting faculty and our administrators, actually the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard University was Jeff Donaldson, and he was a part of this group that originated in Chicago called Afro-Cobra in the 60s. And Afro-Cobra stood for the African Commune of Bad and Relevant Artists, and they had their own color schemes using bright, intense colors that people were wearing in their clothing in that time when you look back at photos of the 60s. And they were cool and they were relevant because the colors also relate back to the African continent. So in their manifesto, they were saying, your art should make your people feel proud. Your people should see themselves in your artwork. When Black people look at your artwork, they should learn something about themselves as in who they are, what their heritage was. So you'll see that in my artwork. These are some early examples of quilts that I did when I was in grad school at Montclair State. I created a portrait of my grandfather. So there goes that question again, why are you creating? I wanted to create an image of a grandfather who I did not know and didn't have any photos of. And my grandfather was a man from northern Ghana. He died in the 1950s. And so I have two sides of my family. My father's from Ghana and my mother was born in New Orleans. And all of her sides born and raised in New Orleans. So I have the African side of my family and the American, but I'm curious about that grandfather, which is why I created this quilt. And I used cut up pieces of my grandfather's my father's dashikis from the 60s. I didn't have anything left for my grandfather. And I was trying to construct what I thought he may have looked like. And on the left is my first portrait that I did. I did this while I was in school. And on the right is 1 year later, I had graduated and I tried to do it again. And you can see a difference because I'm learning how to show emotion, how to create a realistic expression by using those bits of fabric. This is a portrait I did of my grandmother and my grandfather. This is on my mother's side of the family. So my grandmother Violet, and you'll see the violets on the side. I'm using the fabric to describe her. I'm talking about her name, but I'm also talking about, with fibers, I'm talking about what her personality was like, her sweetness, her softness, and my love for her. This is a piece that I did that I wanted you to see 3 iterations. This is one of my really good friends, a woman named Fiona. She's a woman now. This is her when she was only 6. And you can see her as a little girl in the photograph on the left. And in the middle, I did a portrait of her that was made all out of cloth. And then on the right is my most recent version. So I'm always working through similar themes. A lot of times I don't always use the same photo, but this one I was inspired and I felt like I didn't quite say what I wanted to say about it. So finally on the right-hand side, I'm using these light and dark or these bright orangey reds and these deep blues and navies to express the 2 sides of the woman that I know and the child. She was a young girl immigrating from Jamaica to the US. So there was a happiness, a new life, new beginning, and also sadness, leaving behind your beautiful island life and everything that you've ever known, and then suddenly coming to the United States. And then again, I'm using colors reminiscent of the Afro-Cobra influences. This is a portrait by Russell Lee taken in 1941, Easter morning on the south side of Chicago. And I put that there so that you could see my version of the piece. I did a quilted version of this that I exhibited in Chicago in 2018. And I really enjoy celebrating the diversity within the Black community, the African-American community. I was a former high school art teacher. I taught for 13 years, and I thought it was so important to keep reiterating to people how each child is different, each one is precious and individual. And another beautiful thing about being an African American is that it's a beautiful thing, I should say, or it's a mysterious thing, but we don't all know exactly where our ancestors came from on the continent, only that we have African roots. So as I explored these young men, I really got into playing up their features and trying to see, you know, what ethnic group. I have an uncle who worked for the Peace Corps, and when he came and looked at the piece, he said that he could see South Africa, West Africa. He could see like a Hausa, Northern Nigerian. He could see East African, but he could see these features even within the quilt that I had made, representing this wide swath of our Black diaspora. And these are two pieces that I've done a lot more recently. Sometimes I'm interested in doing historical figures. So on the left, you see a portrait of Frederick Douglass. And on the right was an unknown little boy that it was taken. This was in the National Archives, and the photo just said, "Boy, Mississippi Delta." So I think it's so important to celebrate those people who are famous and known, but then what about the unsung heroes? Just an ordinary person, what is the value of just being an individual? And on each of them, I tried to use the fabric to describe their personalities and what they may have gone through in their life. On Frederick Douglass, I'll zoom in, you can see on his pants that vegetation and it was something that looks like the sun or a bird. That fabric itself is made by this company called Vlisco, but that fabric was designed by a woman, a young woman who had been through a serious situation, being a victim of war crimes and sexual torture in the Congo. And she talked about how she suffered during that time and then was able to rise up and she's now living and working in a refuge called the City of Joy. So this fabric is City of Joy fabric, and it's designed by these women who have gone through trouble and have been able they have been able to improve their life situation by aid, by humanitarian help, and by also just their own will to survive and to do better. And so you'll see the vegetation representing when they were struggling, and then the bird and the sun and the clouds at the top, even the flowers, representing how they're traversing through that. The fabric on his sleeves is known as ABCD in Africa, and that ABCD fabric was made to commemorate and to celebrate in the early 1920s that I'm a literate person, I'm proud that I'm educated, and who else should wear that fabric but Frederick Douglass, a man who had to teach himself to read. I think the mistress who owned him helped him learn to read somewhat, and then the kids, white kids in the neighborhood, he would like work with them and play with them when he was little, and they helped him learn how to read. And then of course the birds, us being African Americans, our symbolism of the bird represents freedom. And then the same, you'll see that the fabric on the little boy, I'm using that speed bird fabric in the background. I put, this photo was taken in the 40s, so I put airplanes on his pants to represent what he might see when he looks around. And also the landscape at the bottom, I'm thinking about that rural landscape, that life in the Mississippi Delta. I put the book on his sleeve because I don't know this boy and I don't know his story, but I'm thinking about what I want for him. What I wish is that he had a good education, and I hope that he had so. On his shirt, I put horses, and that fabric in Africa is called le corps de cheval, or in another, it's also known as I run faster than my enemies. And so for this little boy, I want him to be able to outrun his enemies of racism, segregation, degradation, all of the things that I know we face now, and I know that he faced then at the same time. And then this is another recent piece of mine, two young women that I just wanted you all to see how much I enjoy celebrating the beauty that is Black people, and that ordinary people are beautiful as well. I don't know either of these women. The woman on the left was from a postcard taken in Madagascar in around the 1890s, 1900. And then on the right is a young woman, United States, also unknown to me. And it was just that she was she was a graduate, but I don't know if she was high school or college. I couldn't tell. And her age, she looked so young, but I just wasn't certain. But each of them had this regality about them, this beauty about them that I wanted to capture. And I'm going to zoom in on this one that I call Asanchua. So you can see on her sleeve, that fabric with the bird in the cage. To me, that symbolizes, I know why the caged bird sings, and Maya Angelou, and the legacy and the idea of what goes behind being someone who feels that you are like a bird in a cage. This woman was sitting, posing for this photo, and it was sold in Europe as a postcard, or sold, excuse me, to Europeans in Africa as a postcard. It had writing all over the side of her face. And so I thought about her as that bird in the cage. And in Africa, that particular fabric is called If You Leave, I Leave. And it symbolizes female solidarity. So I thought it was important to put that piece on there to show, like, I feel solidarity with her. And then this is one last piece that I just wanted to show you real quickly before we get into our conversation. This is the biggest piece that I've done to date. It was 10 feet by 12 feet, but all the pieces that you saw before were all life size. So I put this here so you could sort of get the scale there. I like doing life size pieces because I feel like it brings that person and the spirit of that person back to us, and we get to have like this sort of dialogue with this, in a way I feel like I'm having a spiritual conversation with them, and what their life was like, and how I'd like to represent them and bring them back into our world. And I call this piece The Warmth of Other Suns. It's exhibiting at the Art Institute of Chicago right now. It was purchased by the Newark Museum of Art last year, and it took me about 6 months to finish. Each person on here took about a month to complete. And this is just a close-up version of two of the sisters of the piece. I wanted you all to see how I'm treating the skin and the hair and all those separate pieces. Their entire faces, including their lashes, everything is just another piece of fabric. I'm using black velvet for the lashes, and cut up silk flowers for the hair. And the hair, again, I'm talking about the beauty of Black hair, the texture of Black hair by using the flowers, but it's also a double entendre because I'm talking about the delicacy and the beauty of the flowers, and the delicacy and the beauty that I see in these young women. And this is my latest piece. It's on my table now. It's not sewn up yet. And it's a young man who's living now. So this is not taken from a vintage photograph. This is a photographer, a global citizen, a stylist. His name is Trevor Sturman. He actually worked on Black is King with Beyonce, but he himself is so fly that I had to, and I asked him, could I use his photo to create a portrait of him? And so this is my expression of Trevor Sturman made out of cloth. And that is the end of what I am going to share with you guys today. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can get into the conversation.
And I did it again. What I was saying is that we get the opportunity so many times. I thought I had hit it before, and then I looked up and I saw, no, it's not there yet.
No problem.
So we get the opportunity to see an artist's work, and kind of get an opportunity sometimes to read about their concepts, so on and so forth, but actually putting those things together and literally allowing the images to be seen, but also to give a little bit of an idea as to what your emotion or your connection is to those things is absolutely wonderful. And I mean, it's kind of difficult to put into words how important that is, not just for us as professors and those who appreciate art, but also for the students, knowing that we're at an HBCU and knowing that you're connected to those things is absolutely wonderful.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you.
I did have just a few questions. I mean, I know this is not CNN, I won't grill you or anything, but I did want to actually be able to speak to you and have a conversation. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to those who might have questions. I know we have a lot of people in here, and I know they don't want to just hear me speak. I know they want to actually have the opportunity to ask those questions as well. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of things, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, no problem.
So knowing that you actually talked a little bit earlier, a little bit about your background, and knowing that you have kind of a duality of heritages. I mean, we have a strong connection to West Africa here in the States, especially as Black people. But that connection to West Africa and the United States was in your home. I mean, that's your background. So can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, I guess you would say I don't want to call it a duality, but the strength or the connection to your father's side, and the strength and the connection to your mother's side, being from New Orleans, and knowing that New Orleans also has a very rich, almost gumbo-like quality about it of cultures as well.
For sure.
Growing up as a young girl, could you tell us a little bit about how that influenced you?
I would say my father's a typical West African guy. I did read recently that some of the biggest immigrant groups who are coming into the United States today are from the Caribbean and from Africa. So, but when I was younger, I remember being like the only Black kid around whose father was African. But now there's a lot of jokes and memes online, like growing up African, all that stuff is pretty much true. You know, the high expectations that parents have for their kids, or how like a B wasn't a good enough grade. I wouldn't say that my father was strict though, but he did always press on us, talk to us about his life, you know, that he did not grow up with a lot of money. He did not have the privilege of even growing up around his parents. I talk about that grandfather who passed away. So he talked to us about what it was like to be a child of like 10 years old and lose your father and not have money, and how important it was to be educated and to be smart about your money and making the right decisions. I mean, he really believed so much, or believes, I should say, that education was the way. My father was a college president for 40 years, 39 years, and was one of the longest serving college presidents in New Jersey. So you can imagine what that was like growing up. As like I grew up, it was Essex County College. I felt like I grew up in Essex County College, you know. Education was always the vehicle. And then it was the same though. I think having that duality was great, because sometimes we romanticize or think about other. You think about Africans as different and Americans as something different. But on my grandmother's side, my mother's side, those people from New Orleans, it was the same, like that press for education and this deep belief in God and religion. And I remember when I told my grandmother I was going to go to Howard, she was so disappointed because she was from another era. She went to Xavier, but my grandfather was able to get a scholarship and go to school in Belgium. He went to this school called Louvain for his PhD. And this is like it was right before World War II. They actually had to come back on a boat when they evacuated people out of Belgium. But anyway, my grandmother said, well, I thought you would want to go to the best school that you could, because she was looking at Howard as a segregated school, and that if she had to go to Xavier, she didn't have other options in New Orleans or Louisiana at that time. But to me, I looked at Howard as a refuge and a place where I could become socially engaged. So I don't want to get too off topic, but I just want to say that both sides of my family, the African and the American, believed that education was the way to improve their life and to be able to take care of your children and be, I guess I should say, the master of your world. And so I think what I can see more being a person who's both is that we are not very different, but we like to think that we are. And I think that that type of separation and division is deliberate. You know, all of the myths that you're told about Africa in the 80s, it was not cool for me to be the African kid. It wasn't accepted or cute. I remember Black American kids asking me, when you were little, did you have a bone in your nose? Or were you all barefoot? Or you were like, they thought of Africa as dusty and dirty. And that's part of that camouflage. You know, I'm going to steal Africa from Black people, steal you from Africa, and they make you think that you never want to go there because it's really bad. But meanwhile, I'm going to set up over there and have all the business and the luxuries. So I think what being dual has told me that we are the same. That's what it's really shown me, we're the same.
Yeah, that's perfect. And knowing that your decision apparently, I mean, it actually is wonderful to hear that idea of what kind of the concept of your grandmother thinking that you would have chosen a different university, and knowing that you were actually able to go through Howard, find what you needed, and then blossom from that point. How does your family feel? Not sort of saying, I mean, sort of looking back and sort of trying to get a sense of their feelings now as opposed to then, but is there a connection, to a strong connection? I'll put it this way. When I went to college, there was the idea that Black colleges were not, like, just as you said, the same concept, that Black colleges were not the upper echelon of colleges. It was a college that you could get into. But after I went and a couple other people went, we started being pretty much the light that showed that Black colleges were a place that you could get what you needed.
Yes.
And knowing that you connected with professors that dealt with Afro-Cobra and actually dealing with a number of things that force you to see yourself as good enough as a Black woman. In connecting with those concepts that you got from Howard, with the idea, I'm speaking about the idea of Afro-Cobra.
Sure.
And also the strong connection that we have with quilting and fibers.
Yeah.
Also the strong connection that we have with color. Can you give us an idea of, do you feel that you are continuing those that path that has kind of been not set, but that path or that culture of Afro-Cobra and quilting and so on and so forth? Do you feel yourself as a continuation of those, or are you attempting to bring those concepts to a broader community and put a contemporary light on it, or a new light on those things? So do you see yourself as a continuation of that, or are you actually bringing something that would be new to that concept?
I'd say that's an excellent question and an observation, that I'm doing both. You know, I think that for sure, when you go to an HBCU, it was so important because it gave me a sensibility and an aesthetic that was outside of the typical European school aesthetic. You know, if I had gone to any other school, or primarily white institution or an art school, um, most likely the philosophies and the manifestos are coming from Europe. You know, they're looking to ancient Greece and ancient Rome as a standard. They're looking at Leonardo da Vinci as a standard. When I was in school, our heroes were Romare Bearden and Jacob Lawrence. You know, Elizabeth Catlett came to speak at our school. I don't know if she would have been even invited to speak at other schools. Lois Jones would come through. And they were elderly women at that time, but we grew up thinking of Black artists as the top, and they were what we aspired to be like. So I feel like for sure I'm carrying that with me, even though I wasn't a part of Africova. Dean Donaldson or Jeff Donaldson, by bringing that manifesto and putting that responsibility on us, when they talked to us about the talented 10th, you know, we were forced to take African American art in art history, and it was an elective that you could take African art history. But that idea that you as an artist have a responsibility to help your people. It's art for the people. It's not, they never impressed upon us that art is just for you as an individual, because you have this skill you've been blessed with, and you've honed this skill where you can communicate an idea. And then yet we're also Black people in this world, and our people are suffering, especially now. We're all watching this trial. I know all of us, including me, hearing, I'm half traumatized right now.
Yeah.
After hearing some of the things that I heard recently, even just this morning, hearing George Floyd's girlfriend talk about how they met, and how the first thing he said to her was, "Sister, are you okay?" Like, this gentle person, that loss is there. So if I can make a piece of artwork to do something good for my people, then that's my responsibility. So I do feel like I carry that with me all the time. I don't have in my mind art just for art's sake. And that sounds like a beautiful thing. And if anybody works in that way, please don't let me impose that upon you, that you can't just create just because you feel like it, just because you want to do it. But me, myself, I always feel like, especially being a teacher, that I know that I'm putting this out there in the world and I want it to do something good. So if that's carrying quilting into the future, that's our thing. Our people, we came with skills from Africa already. When you look at African American quilting, not just the quilts that we had to make for the master or the mistress, but the quilts that we made on our own, you see these African rhythms and sensibilities coming through. So my mother and grandmother weren't quilters, and because of how our people were stolen away, I don't know if my family, my ancestors, were quilters or not. On the plantations in Louisiana, maybe they were, but I do feel like I have a duty to keep quilting alive for us, and also to refute all of the negative things that we see on TV and the news and the movies. I mean, my goodness, if I can make a piece of artwork and change some of that negative perception, then why wouldn't I? That's what I feel about that.
And to kind of build on that idea, connecting the idea that you were just talking about, education, and seeing yourself as a teacher, and the role and the responsibility that I mean teachers have, knowing that they have especially I'm speaking more so of teachers of art, and having that role of having kind of the student in their hands at that point in time. I heard an interview, and you may have said it also, that the idea that a teacher challenged you with, I mean, you were seeing a problem in your own painting, and knowing that a teacher challenged you to, I mean, in looking at the clothing that you had on, challenged you to sort of make or see yourself in your work. And knowing that we are dealing with, I mean, knowing that you're dealing with a functional piece of fiber that is made to function in a certain way. How did you feel as an artist finding your sensibility and your concepts and your thinking match the medium? I mean, that's one of the most difficult things is, I mean, a number of times artists will go through their entire life and maybe never or never challenge themselves or have someone challenge them to find the medium that's going to basically allow them to say what they want to say.
Sure.
How did it feel to have the sensibility and the connection to the medium that allowed you to say what you want to say?
How it felt was like the light was finally on, you know. I struggled with that, as do a lot of people. You know, I remember looking to the left and looking to the right and thinking like, why is their work so good and mine not? One time it was a day I remember when it all became clear that there was a young lady in the middle of the room and we had all our easels and we're all painting. So I couldn't see what anybody else was painting. And at the end of the 3-hour session, you know, we turned the easels around and the young lady next to me, her work was so great. She was a friend of mine. Her name was Jamila, and she had excellent line work. So she had transformed the young woman in the room. She put a Bantu knots in her hair, and she had made this whole graffiti style landscape around her. And I was just like, mine looked exactly like the girl looked in the room, realistic. And so I was like, okay, this is not what I want. Yes, I want to be able to paint realistically, but what about after that? What do I have to say about anything? So to have my professor, Al Smith, he offered, I told him I was just struggling. It just wasn't working. So he came over to our house. We lived on Q Street, and I lived with about seven other kids, girls and guys. And they were in and out. Tribe Called Quest was like real big at that time. And, you know, we were rocking the nappy hair and the twists and the dreads. Incense was burning, you know, other substances were being smoked. And I was there in the dining room working with my friends, sort of passing in and out and around. And Al Smith just looked at me and he was like, you've got all of this going on and around you, but none of this is in your artwork. And for me to just start gluing pieces of fabric and feeling that tactile sensation, there's something connected there. I think that it suited me. It suited what I liked. It suited with my genetic makeup, but for whatever it was, it worked out. But I didn't start quilting. I didn't move away from canvas altogether until I was almost 28 years old, 27, 28 years old in grad school. So any of us out here, if there are artists who are listening, don't worry so much that if you haven't gotten it yet, because I think experimentation is so important. Like you said, Sam, like, what if you go your whole life and you didn't find that medium? But you have to be exposed to that medium. So how would you know? One of my favorite artists, Natsui, he's Ghanaian, he puts all these bottle caps together. And he has these bottle caps strung up that they look like Egyptian gold. But at what point do you start playing around with bottle caps and stringing them together and decide that you like this and your medium is bottle caps? So I think experimentation is so important. I see Afua, she says she loves it too. Sculpture, even though I'm quilting now, I wouldn't just limit myself and say I'm only a quilter. I'm an artist first who is quilting. I might pick up some clay, or I might start carving in wood. I might decide that I want to paint. I might start beating things up. Like, I think that it's important to allow yourself to experiment, and you don't know where it's going to go.
And I would completely applaud that. I truly believe that same thing. And I know that I would love to sit and talk to you for the entire time, but I know that there's some other questions that people are like, okay, it's time for him to be quiet. Let somebody else speak. So, I mean, I'm going to ask if Courtney is fine with maybe choosing a couple of questions that she feels would be good for the conversation as well.
I think there was a process one that sounded good. Let's see. Are the quilts sewn? Are they hand or machine? So a process, sort of like what's your actual process in the sewing?
Well, my process starts out more painterly in a way. I use a lot of photographic influences, or all, I should say. I don't have like a model set for me. I'm into using vintage photos, something about the black and white photos that really draw me in. So I make a sketch from that photo, and that sketch becomes my pattern, like a dressmaker. So at first, it's more like, when it's that sketch, I could have continued to sketch it more. I could use that and start doing underpainting. But what I've decided is that I'm not actually going to use that paper at all. I'm going to cut it up and use that to make a pattern. And then then I start working like a dressmaker or a quilter. And I'm using each piece that I've cut to substitute a piece of fabric in there. And that process takes a long time. It's a process called applique, where you're just applying. I'd say applique is more, it's just like collage, right? Without the glue, just putting pieces of fabric on top of other fabric is applique. And once I've got the face and the figure and all those pieces, and I skipped over that because that process can take like 100 hours. So this might be like a week, or it could be 1 week, depending on how stressed I am, how much work I have to get done. But mostly this is a 2-week process. Then I pin everything. And my quilts have 3 layers. It's the top, where you see all the face and all that hands. Then there's a batting inside and a backing. And I put them all on my machine. It's called the long arm quilting machine. And I stitch it all together. And the stitching takes about a week. So that's lovely and really quick. Somebody asked, I think they asked about the color palette or the fabric itself. I'm sourcing from everywhere and anywhere. I mean, primarily though, I'm using this company called Vlisco because I really love their fabric. But there's another company that I buy from online called Urban Stacks. It's a young woman. I think she may be Ghanaian or Nigerian, I'm not sure, but she's in London. So I get a lot of fabric from her. Then I go to the local fabric shops around here, and I'm in New Jersey, Central Fabrics. So everywhere. And the picking out of those fabrics, that 100 hours, is not because it takes 100 hours to cut out a piece of fabric, but it's the decision. What color goes next? What am I trying to say? There was a quilt that I showed earlier of my friend Fiona, and I had her in reds and oranges on one side and blues and greens on the other. But I want to say something about her being this child on this journey that was both happy and sad. So I'm using the color to express the emotion, the warm and the cool. But I'm also using colors to mute the idea, is Fiona light skin or dark skin? I don't want people to be able to tell. And I don't want us, unfortunately, our country is so stratified with white and black, and us within our own community, the African American community, that Blacks in the diaspora, light and dark, that I want it to be, you don't know, is she light or dark? So you're just gonna have to deal with her as a young girl. That is it. And sometimes people assume things. They're like, oh, I can tell she was this or that. And I'm like, maybe yes, it may not be what you think at all, but I don't want it. That's not what I want to say at all. And if it's too obvious, unfortunately, we get hung up on that.
Another question was, how are you were you influenced by other African American quilters, Harriet Powers, Gee's Ben? If so, how?
For sure. Yes, I'll say one of my most favorite artists, people, individuals, activists is Faith Ringgold. I look at Faith as the top artist working in quilts in the country. Um, I may not go so far as saying the world because I don't know, but to me it feels like the world. The Gee's Ben Quilters, I saw their exhibit at, I think it was either the MoMA or the Whitney in 2003, or it might have been 2004, but either way, I was in school at the time, I was in grad school, and when I saw the women of Gee's Ben's quilts on the wall in this museum, it gave me the idea that I remember thinking that day, I could do this. I could be a professional quilter and I could make a living. I didn't realize at the time that those women were only getting like $100 per quilt, and the quilt organizer was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't know that. So that perception, in a way, it helped me. It wasn't good at all. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying that it allowed me to think that I could make a living as a professional quilter and have my work on the walls in museums.
Another one is asking about, as you get busier and busier, how do you feel about having assistants doing some of the sewing?
No, not the sewing, but I actually did have an assistant. And actually, I hate to even call her my assistant because it feels weird. When I was a classroom teacher, the senior teacher, the lead teacher in the room, I was art and a cart. And that was her classroom. She taught fibers. Her name was Ellen Weisford. And when Ellen retired, then it became my classroom. And then when I quit teaching like 3 years later, Ellen was retired and her granddaughter lives across the country. So she helps me out. So she assists me. So it's weird to call her assistant, but she helps me with actually she does do my binding. So, okay, the binding is like a kind of like a framing at the edges of the quilt. That's all I could let go with as far as on the fabric itself. But she helps me in a lot of other ways, preparing, helping me select colors, like helping me look at if something else is working or not, helping me critique the work. She's looking at it and saying like, this doesn't look like it's working. She's helping me with designing the composition if it's multiple figures. And she's helping me get my thoughts out too. When I'm writing, I have to write a lot lately, but it's statements on everything. But she helps me go through my statements. So she helps me in a lot of ways. But I don't know about having I know some people have the Warhol factory. I don't know about that. I think it means so much to me, each piece, that I can't imagine giving those parts out. And somebody said, what companies? The companies that I really love for artwork is, see, my mind is all on art. They are fabric companies. There's a company called Blisco. It's Vlisco, and that they're in Amsterdam. And that term Dutch wax, it's really made in Holland, and it has been since the 1840s. There's whole discussions on that and how Dutch wax was really made in Holland to market to Africa. In Africa, most of the fabric was still being woven, like kente cloth and or hand printed like adire cloth. So another company is called Urban Stacks, and it's urban, the word URBAN, and then Stacks, I think, is STAX. And she sells a lot of the fabric like what I'm wearing right now. It's adire, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And then there's a company, a woman who I know, Lisa Shepherd in New Jersey, She has a company called Cultured Expressions, and she teaches there. She does workshops. She used to do whole workshops and bring you to Ghana, and you got to make your own cloth. And then she had cruises, but COVID has cut everything down. But if you look up Lisa Shepherd, Cultured Expressions, she still has a shop that she sells lots of beautiful, beautiful wax cloth.
I think one of maybe the last questions was, when are you going to be showing in the Northeast?
Northeast, that is such a good question. My exhibit at the Art Institute of Chicago will be up until September 6th. So the Midwest is covered, but right now I'm working on a new exhibit that is going to tour the country, and it'll start at a museum in Washington, D.C. And then I don't know if that counts as Northeast, but at least that's the East. It'll start in D.C. and then move to the Midwest and then end up on a museum in the West Coast. But none of them are like, I just can't say yet, but it's going to be DC, Midwest, and then Los Angeles, I think. And average people can buy my art. Just to say, the Art Institute of Chicago is selling one small print now, and they're going to have 2 more. So they're going to be 3 prints, and I think they're like $15. And they'll be at the Art Institute, I think, by the end of the month. So that's an easy way that anybody can have a piece of my artwork. But other than that, my originals are sold by the Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem. And so yeah, that's how to get limited edition prints and actual original quilts.
They were up on the website. I think you could purchase them now.
Oh, great. I gotta go look. I didn't realize that.
They're at least at the bottom of the page. I saw them, and
Yeah, that's great.
Noting.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I think that might be it. If we have any last questions or comments, you can throw them
Well,
in.
somebody says they went to Columbia High School and lives in Philly. Oh, wow. Rachel, thank you so much for visiting my exhibit.
All right. I accidentally muted you, Sam.
And somebody says tips for getting better at art. Oh man, I'm such a firm believer in education. Speaking to a former teacher, practice. You have to keep trying new things and visit lots of exhibits. Oh, I used to love when we were out and about more. I did go to the Brooklyn Museum for the first time in a long time recently, but go to those free museum days and see the artwork on the walls, and especially the days where you can sketch in the museum. But I mean, that's the old way of doing it. It's okay. I'm a firm believer also in copying originals, not selling it. I'm not like, I'm not going to copy Faith Ringgold's work, but how am I going to learn how to do what she's doing unless I do it myself? And now I have to figure out, how can I use that skill, that Faith style, and make it my own, that's not a little copycat Faith, but maybe I'm a little bit of Faith and a little bit of Jacob and a little bit of Basquiat and a little bit of Picasso. Like, it's okay to be influenced by others while you're finding your own thing, but to just keep at it. If you do not practice at it, you're not going to get better, and that's the saddest part about it.
And we certainly thank you so much, Bisa, for this. And I think we'll all be going out and trying to grab some Kool-Aid colors and see if we can get some things done.
Yes, do that. And also, like you mentioned that, Samuel, cut up some of your old things too. You don't even need to go out. You already have it. All those bags of clothes going to the Salvation Army, and all those loud colors that nobody wants to wear nowadays. I love those things. So thank you.
Such great histories also.
Yeah.
Right. But thank you all for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time out, and if I can inspire you to do a little something in fabric, go on and do it. But just do whatever calls to you. Do what is interesting and what calls to you. And that's where your inspiration will lie.
And I think you've inspired us all to do just that. We certainly appreciate your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope everybody has a great Friday. Thank you, Bisa. Thank you, Sam, so much. That was awesome. And if you want to catch this conversation, it will be up in a few days on our YouTube channel, TSU Art and Design.